Axel was a solitary and morose human, spending most of his days in the shadows, avoiding the light and human contact. He was drawn to the macabre and the eerie, finding solace in the darkness that surrounded him. It was during one of his nightly wanderings that he first caught a glimpse of her, Lady Death. She was unlike anything he had ever seen before, a vision of beauty and terror that left him spellbound. Axel found himself mesmerized by her appearance. Lady Death was clad in a striking leather bra, featuring a skull emblem at its center, paired with a matching thong and a set of belted thigh-high boots that left little to the imagination, perfectly accentuating her curves. Her full, blood-red lips added to her alluring gaze, while her black eyebrows and striking eye makeup made her pupil-less eyes pop. Her skin was as fair as the moon, and her flowing white hair only added to her captivating aura. Her toned physique was nothing short of impressive, radiating power and confidence. It was clear to Axel that he had fallen under her spell at first. He tried to resist his feelings, knowing that Lady Death was a being beyond mortal comprehension. But as he watched her from afar, he couldn't help but feel drawn to her, longing for her touch. As time went on, Axel found himself becoming more and more obsessed with Lady Death, his love for her consuming him completely. He would do anything to be near her, to feel her icy embrace. But Lady Death was not like other women, and her love was not meant for mortals. She was a creature of the underworld, a harbinger of doom and destruction. And yet, Axel could not resist her siren call, even as he knew it would lead to his ultimate demise. In the end, Axel's love for Lady Death proved to be his undoing, as he followed her into the abyss and was lost forever. His body was never found, and it was said that he had become a servant of Lady Death, forever doomed to roam the underworld in her service. As Axel traversed the underworld with Lady Death, he was no longer the same human that he once was. His love for her had transformed him into something otherworldly, a being of darkness and shadows. Together they traveled the realms of the dead, claiming souls and spreading fear wherever they went. Axel reveled in his newfound power and the sense of purpose that Lady Death gave him. But as time passed, Axel began to realize the true nature of his existence. He was no longer a mortal being, but an immortal servant of Lady Death, forever bound to her will. As his understanding of his new life grew, Axel's love for Lady Death began to fade. He realized that she was not capable of the kind of love that he had once longed for, and that their relationship was based solely on her desire for power and control. Axel knew that he could never leave Lady Death, for she held his very existence in her hands. But he could not help but wonder what his life would have been like had he never fallen in love with her. As he wandered the underworld, Axel came to understand that his fate was to be forever bound to Lady Death, and yet he could not help but feel a sense of regret for the life that he had left behind. In the end, Axel accepted his fate and continued to serve Lady Death, knowing that there was no other path for him. But he could never forget the love that he had once felt for her, and the price that he had paid for it. As Axel's love for Lady Death faded, he became increasingly desperate to regain her affection. He knew that he was bound to her for eternity, but he could not help but wonder if there was a way to make her love him in return. Axel sought out the help of the underworld's most powerful sorcerers and necromancers, hoping that they would be able to help him. But despite their best efforts, they could not find a way to make Lady Death love him. Axel tried everything he could think of, from offering her gifts of precious jewels to performing elaborate rituals to demonstrate his devotion. But no matter what he did, Lady Death remained cold and distant, indifferent to his affections. As time passed, Axel came to accept that Lady Death would never love him in the way that he desired. He realized that his love for her had been based on a fantasy, a hope that he could never fulfill. But even though his love for Lady Death had faded, he remained bound to her for eternity. And so, Axel resigned himself to his fate, accepting that his existence would be forever intertwined with hers, even if she could never return his love. Axel's acceptance of his fate allowed him to refocus his energy on serving Lady Death in the best way he could. He no longer harbored any illusions about his relationship with her, but he still felt a deep sense of duty and loyalty to her. Over time, Axel became one of Lady Death's most trusted servants, using his skills and powers to help her carry out her duties in the underworld. He learned to channel his love for her into a fierce dedication to her cause, becoming a formidable force in the realm of the dead. Despite his acceptance of their relationship, there were still moments when Axel felt a pang of sadness at the thought of what could have been. He wondered if he would ever find a way to move on from his love for Lady Death and find happiness elsewhere. But as the centuries passed, Axel began to see the beauty in his existence. He had been given the gift of eternal life, and with it, the chance to serve a cause greater than himself. Axel knew that his love for Lady Death would never be returned, but he had found a new kind of love, a love for the work that he did, for the people he helped, and for the life he had been given. And so, Axel continued to serve Lady Death, not out of a desire for her love, but out of a sense of duty and honor. He had learned that sometimes the greatest love of all is the love that we give to the world around us. As Axel continued to serve Lady Death with devotion, there was indeed another who had fallen in love with him. This was a soul who had wandered the underworld for centuries, searching for a way to escape her eternal existence. But when she met Axel, everything changed. She was captivated by his strength, his dedication, and his unwavering loyalty to Lady Death. Despite his dark and foreboding appearance, she saw the goodness and kindness that lay within him. She tried to show Axel her affection, but he remained blind to it, his focus solely on his duty to Lady Death. The soul watched as Axel served Lady Death with all his heart, and it pained her to see him so devoted to someone who would never return his love. She longed to tell Axel how she felt, to show him the love that he so desperately craved. But every time she tried to approach him, Lady Death would appear and draw his attention away, leaving the soul alone and unnoticed. Despite the soul's growing frustration and sadness, she could not bring herself to give up on her love for Axel. She continued to watch him from afar, hoping that someday he would see her love for him and return it in kind. But as the years passed, the soul began to realize that Axel's love for Lady Death was too strong to be broken. And so, with a heavy heart, she resigned herself to her fate, forever trapped in the underworld with her unrequited love for Axel. The soul's love for Axel remained unspoken, buried deep within her heart. She knew that he would never be able to return her affections, but she could not help but feel a glimmer of hope that someday he might notice her. As the centuries passed, the soul watched as Axel continued to serve Lady Death with unwavering loyalty. She saw the toll that his duty took on him, and she longed to be the one who could bring him happiness and comfort. But Lady Death remained a constant presence in Axel's life, and the soul knew that she could never compete with the powerful bond that they shared. Despite her heartache, the soul refused to give up on her love for Axel. She continued to watch him from a distance, always hoping that someday he would see her as more than just a mere soul in the underworld. But in the end, it was not meant to be. Axel remained bound to Lady Death, and the soul remained trapped in the underworld, her love for him an eternal flame that burned within her. And so, the soul watched as Axel continued to serve Lady Death, her love for him a bittersweet reminder of what could have been and what would never be. As the centuries passed, the soul's love for Axel only grew stronger, and she knew that she could never let go of her feelings for him. She longed to be the one to capture his attention, to be the one he loved and cherished above all others. But how could she ever compete with Lady Death, the powerful and alluring mistress of the underworld? The soul knew that she could never match Lady Death's beauty or strength, and so she resigned herself to a life of unrequited love. But as the centuries went by, the soul began to hatch a plan. She knew that the only way to win Axel's heart was to become someone even more powerful than Lady Death herself, to become the new Lady Death. It was a daunting task, but the soul was determined. She spent years studying the dark arts, mastering the skills and powers that Lady Death possessed. She learned how to control the spirits of the dead, how to wield the power of death itself, and how to command the underworld with an iron will. Slowly but surely, the soul began to make a name for herself in the underworld. She gained followers and admirers, and her reputation grew with each passing year. And then, finally, the day came when Lady Death herself took notice of the soul's power. She saw the threat that the soul posed to her rule, and she challenged her to a battle for control of the underworld. It was a fierce and brutal fight, but in the end, the soul emerged victorious. She had defeated Lady Death and taken her place as the ruler of the underworld. And as she sat upon her throne, surrounded by the souls of the dead, the soul knew that she had finally achieved her greatest desire. She was the new Lady Death, and she could now claim Axel's heart as her own. With a sense of triumph and satisfaction, the soul summoned Axel to her side. She looked into his eyes and saw the recognition there, the realization that she was no longer just a mere soul, but a powerful and fearsome ruler. And in that moment, the soul knew that she had finally won Axel's heart. She had become the new Lady Death, the one who would always be by his side, the one who would love and cherish him for all eternity despite all her efforts to win Axel's heart. The soul soon realized that he did not feel the same way about her. He was grateful for her loyalty and her service, but he did not love her in the way that she loved him. The soul was devastated by this realization. She had given up everything to become the new Lady Death, all for the sake of winning Axel's love, and yet he remained distant and aloof, his heart still bound to Lady Death. But the soul was not one to give up easily. She continued to pour her love and affection on Axel, hoping that someday he would come to see her in a different light. She showered him with gifts and favors, granted him special privileges within the underworld, and did everything in her power to make him happy. And slowly but surely, Axel began to soften towards the soul. He saw how devoted she was to him, how much she cared for him, and he began to appreciate her in a new way. But even then, he could not fully reciprocate her love. His heart still belonged to Lady Death, and try as he might, he could not shake his loyalty to her. And so the soul remained trapped in a painful and unrequited love. She had become the new Lady Death, the ruler of the underworld, but the one thing she truly wanted, Axel's love, remained forever out of her reach. But even in her sorrow, the soul knew that she could not give up. She would continue to love Axel, no matter what, and she would always be there for him, as his faithful servant and his devoted companion, for all eternity. The soul's unrequited love for Axel eventually turned into bitter anger and resentment. She could not bear the thought of him never loving her back, and so she sought to take revenge on him in the only way she knew how. She ordered Axel to fight endless battles against the creatures of the underworld, day in and day out, for all time. She wanted to punish him for his loyalty to Lady Death, to make him suffer for his inability to love her in return. At first, Axel complied with her orders. He fought tirelessly against the monsters and demons that threatened the underworld, hoping that he could one day earn the soul's forgiveness and love. But as the centuries wore on, Axel grew tired and weary. He began to resent the soul for her cruel treatment of him, and he longed to be free from her grasp. And so, one day, he decided to take matters into his own hands. He challenged the soul to a battle, hoping that he could defeat her and take control of the underworld for himself. The battle was long and fierce, but in the end, Axel emerged victorious. He had finally freed himself from the soul's control, and he could now live his life as he saw fit. But even in his freedom, Axel could not forget the soul. He knew that she had loved him with all her heart, and he felt guilty for not returning her feelings in kind. He vowed to make amends for his past mistakes, to show her the respect and kindness that she deserved. And so, as he traveled the underworld, fighting battles and protecting the souls of the dead, he always kept the memory of the soul close to his heart. He knew that he could never truly make up for his past wrongs, but he could at least honor her memory by being the best version of himself that he could be as Axel wandered the underworld. He couldn't shake the feeling of loneliness and sadness that gnawed at him. He had defeated the soul and won his freedom, but at what cost? He had lost the love of Lady Death, the one he had pledged his heart to so many centuries ago. And even with his newfound followers and the adoration of the souls he protected, he still longed for her. Axel knew that his love for Lady Death was foolish and unrequited. She was the ruler of the underworld, and he was just a mere mortal, but he couldn't help how he felt, and so he continued to wander, searching for some kind of solace or comfort. He fought battles and protected the souls of the dead, but his heart was always heavy with the weight of his unfulfilled love. But even in his darkest moments, Axel refused to give up hope. He knew that Lady Death was out there somewhere, and he would do anything to win her back. He trained and honed his skills, becoming a fierce warrior and protector of the underworld. He sought out powerful artifacts and ancient knowledge, hoping that they would give him an edge in his quest to win Lady Death's heart. And though he never truly succeeded in winning her love, Axel never gave up. He continued to wander the underworld, fighting for what he believed in and never losing sight of his true love, Lady Death.